Jacques Chirac at one time said, without her colonies, France would become a third world country. So there is an element of desperation that is driving this diplomacy by Macron. When I see Emmanuel Macron today, my mind takes me back to history. And that history is 1944 in what was then known as French Equatorial Guinea in Brazzaville. In 1944, just before the end of the Second World War, Charles de Gaulle, who was then in the opposition to the Germans who had occupied France, summoned the colonies in Brazzaville, which is modern-day Congo Republic. During that meeting, the result was the Brazzaville Declaration, in which France said that for their survival, they needed the colonies. And if you proceed a little more after the war, in the establishment of the Fifth Republic in 1958, it is the same Charles de Gaulle who tells the colonies, you either vote no or yes. Yes to mean that you get some autonomy but remain within France. We control your foreign affairs. We control your economy. It is only Guinea under Sékou Touré that votes no, and they destroyed Guinea. We then see them destroying Algeria. And when the countries become independent, a number of things happen in the former French colonies. Number one, they retain military presence in all their former colonies in the continent of Africa. They control their currency, CFA franc, whether it is in Central Africa or in Western Africa. They control everything from Paris. And of course, France, as we see it today, is reminiscent of France in the 1940s and 1950s in terms of what is considered to be a loss. When there was a coup d'etat in Guinea, a coup d'etat in Niger, a coup d'etat in Burkina Faso, and a coup d'etat in Mali, the leaders of the Sahelian Republic said they don't want French army. They said we don't want French currency. They say we don't want anything to do with French, including mining companies. And Emmanuel Macron, whenever I see him, he's trying to cast himself in the mold of Charles de Gaulle. This great leader who is an avatar of Charles de Gaulle, who wants to make France great again, if I'm to use that terminology. So when you see the activities of Emmanuel Macron as we stand today, understand it at two levels. Level number one, there is a France that is losing its power in the former colonies in the Sahelian Republic. And even beyond the Sahelian Republic, they have trouble with Senegal, which has said, we don't want your army. They have problem in Gabon, where there was a coup d'etat. There was a near coup d'etat in Benin. They don't have the control that they would want to have in Togo. In Central African Republic, there is also the presence of the Russians and a contested election. So they are losing out. And what is Macron trying to do is trying to raid the former colonies of the United Kingdom and Portugal. That is why you've seen Emmanuel Macron in Luanda, in Angola. You've seen Emmanuel Macron in South Africa. And you've seen Emmanuel Macron very present in Kenya, which is going to host the Franc-Afrique meeting. What is Franc-Afrique meeting? The first Franc-Afrique meeting was held in 1973. If you ask the French, they'll say it is the then president of Niger, Hamani Diori, who asked for the meeting. But the truth was that it was the then French Prime Minister Georges Pompidou who asked for the meeting, and the meeting was held in Paris. And the whole idea was that the French wanted to keep their former colonies under their economic check. If you look at the statistics as I speak in the year 2026, there are over 4,200 French subsidiary companies present in the continent of Africa. In Kenya only, there are over 140 French subsidiaries. In the total employment would be in excess of 600 million. And they are in all sectors. They are in oil, Total Energies. They are in the mining sector. They are in manufacturing. There is in the area of artificial intelligence. They are in environment. And all these require a different type of diplomacy. And that is why the French have said in advance of the Nairobi meeting on the 11th and 12th of May, give us a second chance. The first time when we came, we wanted to control you. We wanted to engage with you militarily. This time our diplomacy is a little softer. We want to engage with you in technology, in the arena of artificial intelligence. But the question is it soft? If you look at what has happened in Kenya, they have entered into a military pact with the Kenyan administration. The net effect is that we have an Emmanuel Macron administration that we can actually begin to talk of Macronism as a system of diplomacy that has a carrot and stick. It is iron fist with velvet gloves. And that is what we are seeing. And you can see that the figures vary. The number of African heads of states and government that may appear in Nairobi on 11th through to the 12th are 30 and counting, which is perhaps bigger than the number of African heads of state that attend the ordinary session of the African Union. That tells you that diplomacy is working at different levels. Number one, the French are engaging countries bilaterally. So they go to Kenya, deal with Kenya. They go to Angola, deal with Angola. They go to South Africa, deal with South Africa. They go to Ghana, deal with Ghana. They go to Botswana, deal with Botswana. And in the last 1 month, you will have seen the president of Ghana has been present. Is a lot more sophisticated, may not be confused by these shenanigans. The president of Botswana has also been Paris. So the Macron diplomacy is a diplomacy which is designed to protect France. And it reminds me of a statement made or attributed to one of the former French presidents, Jacques Chirac. Jacques Chirac at one time said, without her colonies, France would become a third world country. So there is an element of desperation that is driving this diplomacy by Macron. The other thing that is driving this diplomacy is superiority within the European system. The Germans silently, because their economy is larger, has been the unspoken leader. With Brexit, I think the French want to cast themselves as the big kahuna. We are the ones. There is the European Union, but when the chips are down, it is us. When the chips are down, it is Macron. And it reminds me of a statement that was made when during the administration, or is it the monarchy of King Henry XIV? When he was asked, what is the state? He said, l'État, c'est moi. I am the state. And I see Macron almost saying, what is the state? L'État, c'est moi. That is how one characterizes, at least from where I sit, the diplomacy that I see being weighed into the continent of Africa and culminating into the Nairobi conference. The first time the France-Afrique meeting is held in a non-French speaking country. It is interesting. Geostrategically, Kenya is an important country in the continent of Africa for a number of reasons. Number one, Kenya is the third most important host of United Nations organizations. Outside of New York, outside of Geneva, we have UNEP, we have many organizations. UNICEF is moving into Nairobi, and Habitat is here. So Kenya geostrategically is the place you want to be, because when you are in Kenya, you are in the heart of East Africa, and I'm talking about the larger East Africa, to include Ethiopia, to include the Horn, to include Somalia, and even to include countries such as Sudan. So geostrategically, you need to have Kenya. Number two, Kenya is the bigger, more dynamic economy. Not that it's a big economy, but relative to the economies in the region, Kenya is your bigger economy. Number three, Kenya has the best quality of labor in this region. That I think is not debatable. And for that reason, you find that Kenya is very strategic. And even if you look at things that are going to deal with critical issues such as artificial intelligence, and you look at the quality of labor in Kenya and the potential for generation of energy, which is going to be critical in this area, Kenya has a good mix of energy if and when we develop this. We'll have geothermal, we'll have hydro, we'll have sizable wind, and with the discovery of oil now, Kenya is also better placed, because if you look at the port of Mombasa and the deep port of Lamu, and you look at how sophisticated they are, then you want to be here geostrategically. So I think that that makes Kenya very attractive. And with the population that the UN brings in here, even in terms of marketing of different commodities, remember that the French are present in the retail sector. They are present in critical areas that support a sophisticated international community. And I think that that is one of the reasons why Kenya is geostrategically a very important country for France, as indeed for many other countries. Number two, it is compensatory. You have lost Niger, you have lost Burkina, you have lost Mali, you are losing Senegal, you are about to lose Gabon, you are about to lose Togo, you are about to lose Chad. You are now getting a country which is not landlocked. You are getting into your enemy's territory. And I'm using the word enemy very deliberately to say these are former British colonies. We are now going to eat into them. We are also going to eat into Angola. But for Kenya, that I think is also a very important thing. And look at the military engagement. The French, in my view, think that they still need to have a military presence in the continent of Africa. You have lost Senegal, which has a sea. You only have Cote d'Ivoire, and then Cote d'Ivoire is the bigger one. The small ones, Togo, Benin, Gabon, are small. The Sahelians were landlocked. So Kenya gives you the Indian Ocean. And if you have the Indian Ocean and you have the French territory in Mayotte, the Mayotte, remember, is still effectively a province of France. And then you have a Comoro. Then you have a big brother in Kenya. From where I sit, Kenya becomes attractive for its geostrategic position. You know, the European Union, one can dare say there is a new scramble for Africa. It is as if Berlin 1884 and 85 is alive, not as loudly. Remember that there is once again contestation that the British had also raided what can be considered French territory in the latter-day sense, that Rwanda, which was not a former British colony, is a part of the Commonwealth. Mozambique, which was not a part of the British colony, is a part of the Commonwealth. So you can see that there is a new scramble for the continent of Africa. And it is not in the blatant way that happened during colonization, but is in a very subtle way. The Germans, because of their history in the World War II, don't want to come out as openly as they could or should. But look at how active GIZ is, or GIZ. There are very few activities in the continent of Africa which you don't see GIZ supporting. They are here. The British, I'm sure after the French-Afrique meeting in the month of May on the 11th and 12th, the Commonwealth will now be revitalized. They'll want to say, you know, we are one family. We must not allow outsiders to come in, and they will not name who the outsider is, but the outsider will be France and other German powers. And remember that many African countries are also engaging with the Chinese, the Road and Belt Project, which is going to be in quite a number of African countries. Remember, the Chinese have said we are giving African goods zero tariff. Remember that African countries are also working under the Africa Agenda 2063 and Africa Continental Free Trade Area. The African market is going to be open. And each of these European powers think of Africa as they thought in the 18th and 19th century, a market that will be coordinated with no tariff barriers and no tariff and non-tariff barriers. So those who are keenly watching must see that there is a new scramble. The only people who don't appear to understand that reality, or they understand but don't care, are African heads of states and government, at least a critical number of them, because their behavior does not tell me that they know that this is happening. Look at energy now. Who controls the energy sector in the oil sector in the continent of Africa? A good chunk of it is Total Energy. If you look at the discoveries that have been made in Uganda, who is financing or invested in the pipeline? Total Energy. You go to Mozambique, the gas is Total Energy. And if they are not coming through Total Energy, it is Ruby. And if they are not coming through that avenue, they are coming through the retail sector in manufacturing. As I have already indicated, there are no less than 4,200 French subsidiary companies in the entire continent of Africa. You imagine if you are to remove them, and they are in telecommunication. They are in the critical sectors that will undergird and underpin, and indeed do undergird and underpin the fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence. Remember that many African countries, including a country that they are getting into their fold, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the rare earth coltan, which is the single most important ingredient in mobile telephony. You can see that the French are there, and they are not the only ones who are there. The other European powers are there, the Chinese are there, the Turks are there. Because the Turks, you also see the Turks want a revival of what one may describe as the Ottoman Empire. So it is mining onshore and offshore and providing you with their technology. And this latter-day diplomacy is deliberately curated to hoodwink the African politician and hoodwinked their. If you look at the history in 1960s, in the early 1960s, I think it was Prime Minister Nehru of India at that time, Prime Minister Sukarno of Indonesia, and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, who came up with something called non-aligned and positively neutral, which meant that you are not politically aligned with any of the powers at that time, which meant that you could open your country to trade with any one of these as long as your country benefited in the short, medium, and long term. The question is, are African countries benefiting in the short, long, and medium term? Are African countries benefiting? Is there transfer of technology, for example? If we look at, for example, the areas where the French are, like logistics, Bolloré, can't 60 years after independence, can't we engage? Do we have Kenyans and Africans who can engage in logistics? If you look at areas where other countries are, such as air transportation, DHL and other DHL, Fargo and those, can't we do those? If you look at areas such as security, where you find Gadaworld, which is Quebecois in Canada, can't we do those? If you look at the deliveries, home deliveries, such as Jumia or Glovo, can't we do those? In other words, what we are seeing with our undefined foreign policy is that we are engaging with many of these countries without a strategic long-term agenda. East African Community long took the view, and African Union long took the view, that if we are to benefit in our diplomacy and relations with other powers, we do so as East African Community. And it started in the early days after the collapse of East African Community 1 in 1977 and its revival. We even had a fast track of the East African Community, where in 2010 we ought to have had an East African president, we ought to have had a single currency, we ought to have removed all the tariffs and non-tariff barriers, we ought to have standardized our VAT of customs union, and we ought to do things as a team. What you now see, Kenya on its own, Uganda on its own, Tanzania on its own, Rwanda on its own, Burundi on its own. And this disunity creates an environment where African countries are engaged in negative competition. And the effect is that we get the short hand of the stick. Because we have not, in my view, those in ministries of foreign affairs may disagree with what I'm saying, but we make the claim that our foreign affairs is trade-led. If it is trade-led, what are we trading? If you look at France, which Kenyan companies are trading in France? What is the balance of payments between Kenya and France? Beyond raw tea and coffee and avocado and other things from the Western Africa, what is it that we are selling to France? Almost next to nothing. And we must not delude ourselves. We are like this bride who thinks she is so beautiful and is being courted by everybody. And the Chinese are here, the Russians are here, the Americans are here, the Turks are here, the French are here, the British are here. But that bride does not know that she is getting old and past childbearing age. And when you are old and past childbearing age, and all the cosmetics in the world can no longer change your looks, then you discover that you've been abandoned and they go to the next new bride. I'm using this analogy consciously aware that it may be considered gender insensitive, but I look at the metaphor that I'm using. And I'm suggesting that the long-term interest of Kenya, of East Africa, of ECOWAS, of the Maghreb, of SADC, of IGAD demands that we collaborate. So I would love to see not a France-Afrique meeting, not a Commonwealth meeting, not a meeting of Portuguese-speaking countries. No, I would love to see, number one, starting East African Community with the European Union. Kenya can negotiate our things within that context. Rwanda can do so, and Burundi in that context. ECOWAS meeting, SADC meeting, Maghreb meeting. But my ultimate desire is a meeting between the AU and the EU. The AU and India. The AU and Russian Federation. The AU and China. The AU and Brazil. The AU and Turkey, the AU and the United States of America. Of course, in that context, the Cote d'Ivoirians, the Togolese and the Ghanaians will discuss cocoa because we don't have it in Kenya or in Tanzania. The Democratic Republic of Congo will discuss coltan within that context. Uganda, now that it has oil, and Kenya, now that it has oil, Nigeria, that it has oil, and Ghana will discuss oil and gas. Mozambique within that context. Then countries will begin to know Oh, they are so united, you can no longer manipulate them. The United States of America will not use AGOA to intimidate us in order to dump second-hand clothing and to kill our textile industries, because we'll be too clever. If you want to build the road and belt, it will be a collaboration with African countries. If you want to do the Lobito corridor from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Luanda in Angola or in Benguela, we'll be invested in it. And we'll tell you there are certain areas where we don't want you. Please, Gadaworld, don't supply us with, don't employ our watchmen. Glovo, please, don't deliver our pizza. This is the kind of scenario that one would love, because it will then be a collaboration which can be clearly referred to as a partnership. For the moment, our economies are so weak. The GDP of Paris, now that we are talking about France, the GDP of Paris is bigger than the entire East Africa. So when you say that Kenya is a partner of France, it is the partnership between a horse and the rider. And that is not partnership. That is not a symbiotic relationship. That is a parasitic relationship. And we want to migrate from parasitism to symbiosis. France will offer some crumbs which will make us happy. I can already imagine the speeches that are going to be read by Macron. Kenya and France have had a long relationship. Total Energies has supplied your energy. Oh, Ruby has been here. Carrefour, we may have divested a little, but Carrefour is here. We are helping you in the logistic with Bolloré. Your airlines, we also have a relationship with NAS. We have a good relationship. We occasionally, they may claim, even get cut flour from you, and we have tea and coffee. We have good relationship. Therefore, this relationship must be strengthened, because we have created anything between 70,000 and 100,000 jobs for you Kenyans. But the question is, does it empower Kenyans? Or it weakens us? By the time they are done with us, will we be stronger or weaker? And it is our duty as a people to define what we want. The French have defined what they want, and it is in their interest that they define what they want. Have we defined what we want? They have defined what we want in the short to medium and long term. Have we defined what we want, or we are just happy that we are the first English-speaking country to host France Afrique, and that 30 heads of state will be present in Kenya, and there will be 30 national anthems being played? Feel good effect without being good. I suspect that that is what will happen to us. So that when we have military collaboration, the second-hand military equipment that France has used elsewhere will be repainted and sold in Kenya. I'm not saying they are doing that, but that is a possibility. So we become a market, not only in the retail, that part of the retail, but also in discarded technology, e-waste. These are possibilities. Remember, what is happening in Nairobi, Kenya in the month of May 2026, I see a similitude of it that took place in Brazzaville in 1944. Charles de Gaulle, wherever he is, must be saying, déjà vu. You know, whenever I think and I see the hand of many of the European powers over the years, I've become a cynic and a skeptic. It reminds me of what it used to be said in the olden days, that be careful of the Greeks even where they bear a gift. And the philosophy of divide, conquer, and rule is still alive in the diplomacy of many Western countries. Kenya is always depicted, and in their unguarded moments, they humor Kenya, say, you are different. Your middle-level economy, your personnel is better, your climate is good, you are different, you are more sophisticated than your Tanzanian economy. You see, Uganda could be doing well, but they are landlocked, so you are better. We are going to deal with you. You are the beloved child. But really, should we buy that? Unfortunately, we do. So it is quite possible that in the minds of some of these countries that are engaging Kenya because they have received or they have a willing partner, they are using it to checkmate the difficult positions or the much tougher positions that are being taken by the Uganda administration on certain things. They are doing that. Tanzania's foreign policy, we know, during Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere was quite clear and tough and was very domestically oriented. And after that, when John Joseph Pombe Magufuli came, he was very clear what he did with mining, gold mining, expelled some of the companies and demanded that they pay tax. So the West, a number of Western countries were not very happy with that administration. As we speak now, the administration of the Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan is unclear. The Westerns are saying you've detained your leading opposition. And in Tanzania, they are also telling President Museveni, your opposition leader is outside of the country. Kenya, at least there is no detainee. They may have misbehaved with the Gen Z riots, but they are still better. So it is right to imagine that is divide and rule. Because when they divide us, they make the dream of East Africa go further and further. Yet the desirable position is that we should act as one. But look at us now. Because of that divide and conquer, we are moving further and further apart from each other. Look at the situation in South Sudan, which is a member of the ACC. Look at the relationship between Burundi and Rwanda. Look at the relationship, sometimes very frosty, between Kenya and Tanzania is thawing a little now. Look at the suspicions within the region. So it is divide and conquer. But once again, I am saying that argument of the ease with which we are divided is one that we should not be using time and again. The time has come that we should know what is in our best interest, and we are safer working as one unit in East Africa and telling the French, telling the others, yes, deal with us as East Africa, whether it is in matters of military, whether it is in matters of development of energy, whether it is in manufacturing, whether it is in technology, whether it is in artificial intelligence, whether it is in textile, we want to speak with one voice. And then our specific agenda will be in the context of that voice. But we are not saying that. It appears we are celebrating that we are the ones who have been chosen. It's like high school students or primary school students who are happy that I'm the teacher's favorite. The teacher can invite me to tea in their house occasionally. That is not a good space to be in. It erodes our self-esteem. It makes our neighbors suspicious about who we are. And in the long run, it is not good for Africa, which wants to build an Africa that is strong and independent but sensitive to the realities of the globe under Africa Agenda 2063. It is not right for an Africa which wants to have an Africa continental free trade area and enhance trade within herself. It is not good for an Africa which has a market of nearly 1.4 billion and can produce those goods and sell them within the African market. So we may sing our hallelujahs now, but I don't think that that is what we desire in the long term. War is an industry, and war is at different levels. It need not be a hot war where people are firing bullets at each other. Even trade wars, even sanctions and embargoes are wars at a different level. And I'm quite certain that there are those within powers that are dealing with Africa who would want such a situation, they'll tell Kenya, you have oil. We can come and build you a refinery. Forget about Uganda. They can tell Uganda, we can do that for you. They can tell Mozambique, they can tell Tanzania, we can do that. They can tell Burundi, they can tell Rwanda, they can tell the Democratic Republic of Congo. So these are things that are happening. And if I ever doubted that that is a possibility in the month of February at the Munich Peace Conference, when I heard the Foreign Secretary of the United States, Mark Rubio, say that the Europeans, Western Europeans, must defend their civilization, he fell short of saying that if it is necessary, we must recolonize these countries. So it tells you that this kind of thinking is alive and well. And if I ever doubted it, when the president of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama, took a resolution to the UN for the world to say that the transatlantic trade was a crime against humanity, the United States of America, Israel, and Argentina voted against the resolution. And all the European powers, including France, all the colonizers abstained. What does that tell you? That in their minds, African countries are still fit for colonization. Remember that the DNA of the colonizer does not change. They only wear different masks. They may have worn the mask of military control. They are now wearing the mask of diplomacy, where they smile. But does it matter whether the person who stabs you at the back is grinning or smiling? You are stabbed. Nevertheless, it is us to wake up. If we continue in our slumber, they'll say, like the English say, let sleeping dogs lie. If you want to change the DNA, you need some genetic engineering. But just to demonstrate how subtle the powers, Western powers, have become over the years, to make you believe that you are now accepted, they'll in a token way invite you to the G20. You'll make a pro forma speech. You meet a few heads of state and have your photo op. They'll invite you to the G7. And the president of Kenya has been invited to the G7 after the invitation was withdrawn from the South African president. The original invitee was Cyril Ramaphosa. And the Americans said, we are not going to allow him to be there. So the African leader will go there, they'll read a speech, they'll have bilaterals with all the G7 countries, the national newspaper will say how this is great for Kenya. But fundamentally, nothing changes. If we want to change the DNA of the former colonizer, we ourselves must change. And we have seen in our lifetime how countries have asserted themselves and they have changed. The post-World War Soviet Union and now Russia Federation asserted herself. And whether you like them or not, you can't joke around with them. China, in the last 30 years, has asserted herself and is now the second strongest economy in the world, the factory of the world. They have asserted themselves and they say democracy with Chinese character. India is asserting herself. Brazil is asserting herself. Indonesia is asserting yourself. In other words, the state of the world, it is that is still the law of the jungle. If you are weak, you will be eaten. If you demonstrate that you are strong, then people will come and negotiate with you in sincerity and you draw the boundaries. Africa must do that. And Africa can only achieve that if she speaks with one voice. If her economy is integrated, and that integration of the economy must start with the regional economic communities, SADC, ECOWAS, East African Community, Maghreb, Central Africa. Then These are the building blocks that you go to Addis Ababa as AU with, and you tell them, we are no longer going to allow African Union and Italy. We are no longer going to allow Commonwealth. We are no longer going to allow France Afrique. We are not going to attend. We are only going to meet as African Union with European Union. And in that way, we will be operating at the level of equality. Then that, what I call the diplomatic genetic engineering, will change. And people will say in Europe, oh, the scales have fallen from off their eyes. And they'll not be happy thereafter. But they will know that things have changed. And relationship must be based on mutual respect. See how China is dealt with. We don't shout at China. No, you must think twice. See how India is dealt with. We can achieve it. Without being all negative, we can argue that if we are wise and clever, we can benefit at different levels. In the short to medium term, from 11 to 12, all the hotels in Nairobi will be full. So that is good for the economy in the short to medium term. In the short term, in the medium term, because this is a global world, we can tell French companies that in terms of engaging with us, we will demand transfer of technology in certain areas. And in the long term, we'll tell them that once our companies have matured, we will ring fence certain areas of our economy which will not be allowed for investment. Logistics, we can do that surely. We can deal with retail. We don't have to have French supermarkets or French-related supermarkets. In the area of refineries, we can tell them now that we have oil in northeastern Kenya, if you want to help us build a refinery, you must do so here so that we benefit not only from refining, but the byproducts. And you begin to divest so that in 25 years' time, we are in total control of our economy. And even if not in total control, but we are relating in a manner that is mutually beneficial. You have 140 and more companies with French companies with subsidiary in Kenya. Are you opening your markets for us in Marseille, in Lyon, in Paris, so that we can package our coffee here, we can package our honey here, we can package our tea here, we can package our avocado here, and they go direct into French supermarkets? This is the kind of negotiation that I would expect to be happening in the back door. But the question, will they? And in the context of the fact that this is not just a Kenyan engagement, but there are other African countries, all these countries must have an agenda of how to ensure that the relationship between Africa and France is not simply one where you are giving us the fish without teaching us how to fish. So these are the scenarios. It's the question of, you've given me a lemonade, given me a lemon, let us make lemonade out of it. But that depends on us. He or she who does not define what he or she wants will be eaten for breakfast. Are we prepared? We are simply going to dance and celebrate at the meeting and tick the box and wait for another meeting in another African country? I hope not.